Joining us is Dr Meir Elran, former Deputy Director of Military Intelligence in the Israeli Defense Force and retired Air Vice Marshal and military analyst Sean Bell. Can we come to you first, Sean? How do you interpret this? Because there is a story going round, would like to get both of your views on this, that this is all part of a deal. That one narrative says that this was the Israeli retaliation to Iran was in direct defiance of what Joe Biden wanted. But the other story I'm reading is this, that Joe Biden said, if you keep your retaliation limited, I will sanction you, the IDF, to go into Rafah to attack the last battalions of Hamas. Do you concur with that narrative?
Good afternoon, Kevin and Alex. Bluntly, no. There's lots of Machiavellian language going on around this. Let's be clear. This current iteration of a long-standing conflict between Iran and Israel started on the 1st of April with the attacks on the Iranian consulate building, 13 people killed, several Iranian commanders. That left Iran. They decided to wait a little bit. Then they struck last Saturday with the 331 missiles. That was a huge barrage, and that left Netanyahu with sort of three choices. Either you do nothing, which for all sorts of reasons wasn't going to happen. The other end of the spectrum is that you meet force with force and mount a massive wave of attacks against Iran. That would definitely have escalated in the region, and therefore the world waited with bated breath to see what the response would be. And in fact, the Israeli response has been measured. I note that there are some of the Israeli hardliners, not least of which the National Security Minister, who's described it as a feeble response. But the fact remains, three positives from an Israeli perspective, one of which is that they have retaliated, effectively had the last word, and it looks like Iran does not want to respond. Secondly, it's hit targets that were directly related to the Iranian attacks on Israeli soil. And thirdly, I think most powerfully from a military perspective, Iran launched everything it had at Israel. Israel and its allies effectively combated that, yet Israel was able to surgically strike within Iran. That will have been a powerful message to Iran. Don't mess with us, because there's a lot more to come if you continue this conflict.
Yeah, Dr. Elran, that's pretty much what I was going to ask you. It seems to me that Iran threw the kitchen sink at Israel and basically failed to land almost everything. But meanwhile, it seems to me the message from Israel to Iran, there's been a lot of secrecy shrouding what was hit, where the drones or the missiles originated from. Iran sort of pretending they didn't come from outside and it might be infiltrators somewhere inside the country. But it seems to me the message from Israel has been, look, we know where your nuclear sites are, and we can get to them if we want to, and you will not know it's coming. Do you think that's a sort of fair enough assessment of what might have happened?
I think it's a fair enough assessment in many ways, but I want to go back to the original question about the context here. We see two different but converging contexts to relate to following what happened last night. Number one is the Israeli-Iranian conflict, and the other one is the war in Gaza. And the most important thing to me is that there is a possibility today, even more so than after the last weekend, that Israel will be able to utilize its very, very strong position within the Western anti-Iranian coalition that has been emerging in the last few months and years, led on one hand by the Western powers, United States, Britain, France, and some others, including Arab, very, very important parties, and Israel, of course, to stand up against the Iranian aggression. And I think that this strengthening of the coalition in the last two episodes, the one is the really remarkable defensive posture of the coalition against the Iranian aggression last weekend. And the second one is the hints, or whatever you want to call it, which is very restrained in nature, apparently of Israel, to the Iranians. Let's stop this, going back and forth with these things, because we have other problems, we have other issues, we have other other challenges. And the most striking challenge for Israel right now is to see some kind of progress, as far as we are concerned in Israel, as to the situation in Gaza. Without the Iranian aggression, without Hezbollah, without Hamas, but with our coalition allies, okay, in order to, number one, terminate the war in Gaza, alleviate the humanitarian situation in Gaza, free or release our hostages from Gaza, and mostly reconstruct a new structure in Gaza that will be not only positive for Israel, but also positive for the people in Gaza and the region as a whole. And I think that we are on the march. We are on the right track in this. We have to be very careful to keep this trajectory going forward.
So, Meir, just before we go back to Sean, are you saying then that you would expect fairly soon the IDF to go into Rafah? Because we're told that the remaining stronghold, the remaining Hamas battalions are there. That was always the intention, was to get Hamas. So following this contretemps in the air between Israel and Iran, will on the ground IDF forces go into Rafah to go after Hamas?
Well, instead of answering you specifically about any kind of a military operation in Rafah, I want to say something in a broader sense. And this is the following. Israel and the Middle East needs to see Hamas eliminated. We don't need them over there in Gaza in order to disrupt, spoil any kind of an effort to reconstruct Gaza. This is important for Gaza. It is important for the Palestinian people. It's important for Israel. And it's important for the entire region in the Middle East. And this is the basic thing and the most important thing. And I was listening very carefully to what your prime minister had been saying before. We need to finish with the aggression of the so-called resistance axis headed by Iran and facilitated by organizations, terrorist organizations like Hamas and Hezbollah. And we have to restructure the whole region in a different way. Eliminating the final battalions of Hamas in Gaza is part of this scheme. It's not the most important one. The most important thing is the emergence and the strength of the coalition that Great Britain is part of in order to have a new chance, a new opportunity for the Middle East at large.
Sean, coming back to you, what do you think Iran, they've said they're not going to respond. It seems to me that they have probably run out of options in which they could come out on top. They're clearly trying to save face by covering up exactly what went on the other night. But they've made lots of veiled threats, such as, well, if you target our nuclear sites, we will make a nuclear warhead. Do you think they are close to having the capabilities to do that? Do you think those are threats that we should take seriously, or is this just Tehran saber-rattling?
Yeah, long before this latest round of conflict, there's been a concern that Iran, not if, but when it builds a nuclear weapon. And of course, once that happens, it changes the balance of power in the region. At the moment, Israel is by far the dominant military power, and despite Iran throwing a lot of weapons at it on Saturday night, the reality was a lot of them blew up on launch. Many of them lost their way, and very few of them were invulnerable to the West's technology to shoot them down. I think if Iran had nuclear weapons, that saber rattling would be very different. And I think there is a quite widespread concern about when, not if, that happens, what that means for stability in the region. And I think the saber rattling is just something that happens routinely. If you ask me about the escalation, I think one of the things that Iran would not have wanted to provide is an excuse or a catalyst for Israel or the West, America, to specifically target Iran's nuclear program, because that would set it back. That would be very damaging to Iran. And strategically, I have no doubt that is their priority. So it looks very unlikely that Iran would want to see a further escalation. The US doesn't want to see an escalation. And I'm sure, as Brigadier Meir talks about, I don't think Israel wants to see that escalation either. So hopefully this is drawn a line under that particular episode and allowing a focus on resolving and finding a peaceful solution to the situation in Gaza.
That's what I was going to ask you, Sean. What happens next in Gaza? Because lest we forget, there are still hostages Israel's mission, quite rightly, is to get them released. It is also to rid the world of Hamas. How do you predict events will unfold going forward in Gaza?
Well, at the risk of trying to avoid being too provocative, I think as a former military guy, having studied history, there is no military solution to what's happening in the region. I have no doubts that I think most of the international community believe Hamas can't be part of the future. I think part of the challenge, though, is whenever I've been involved in operations around the world, the political masters always set a political end state. What does good look like? And the military set the environment for which that can flourish. And what's been evident in this particular conflict is the world, or most of the world, believes a two-state solution of some form is the answer. Yet it's pretty clear that's not what Israel sees. And exactly as Meir says, ultimately, Israel is entitled to its protection, prosperity, and hope. But so the Palestinian people. And how do you create a solution which avoids the visceral hatred that will come from this military operation? And how do you therefore find an enduring peace? Because at the moment, I have no doubt the Israeli Defense Force will be successful at ridding most of Hamas out of the Gaza. But will Israel be any safer as a result of that? Will they have expunged the idea of Hamas, the idea of the hope of a different future? And I think that is something which will need the whole international community to engage in order to find some sort of peaceful coexistence into the future and stop us seeing a rinse and repeat of what we've seen tragically since the 7th of October.
Yeah, Meir, let's expand upon that, because you were talking earlier about a future for Palestine, a future for Gaza without Hamas, that a lot of people, including the Arab neighbours of Israel, would like to see happen now. But one would say that the events of October the 7th were in part due to Iran saying to their proxies, saying to Hamas, look, the normalisation of relationships between Israel and the UAE, Israel and Saudi Arabia, is something that we're not interested in. We don't want this to happen. In fact, we're going to pull the pin out of the grenade and throw it in the middle of a situation because it's beginning to improve. So how do you then deal with a problem like Iran, who it seems to me are not going to suddenly have a volte-face when it comes to their sort of, ideology and their theocracy?
Well, I agree very much with the essence of what you're asking. And this is saying that I think that what is happening now in the last 6 months in the Middle East is a major clash between Iran and its aggressive, Iran and its proxies, of course, and their aggressive mode of action to neutralize what is in the interest, within the interest, not only of the Israelis and the Palestinian people, and the Arab countries, but the world at large. And that is the establishment and consolidation of a major alliance, a coalition between the Western countries, including the US, the UK, France, and the others, pragmatic Arab countries in the Middle East, including Saudi Arabia. Let's not forget them. They are very, very significant in this respect. And Israel and the Palestinian people, to stand up in a very, very robust kind of a military and also political and strategic coalition, okay, to stop the threats and the aggression of the Iranians and their proxies. And I see this coming. It's not something that is going to happen in the next few days or weeks. It has to emerge in a very sophisticated manner. Israel has to be part of it, a leading part of that. It would necessitate some changes in our, policies, perhaps also in our government. But this is something that has to come about. It is very important. It can be happening. And if it does, it will be a major change. That this is being really the greatest victory of Israel and the other pragmatic countries in the Middle East against the Iranians, the Hamasis, and the Hezbollah people.
Thank you ever so much, Dr Meir Elran and Sean Bell. Well, we're still joined by GP and broadcaster Dr René Hundekamp.